Silas, can you hear us?
There's no doubt that Grit-Lit exists because I have here an anthology of Grit-Lit, and it is very clear what it is. Not much mystery left about what it is. We can very quickly run through the characteristics of this subgenre. One characteristic. Tommy.
Alcohol.
I'd say
George.
blue collar narrator. Dead animals.
Tommy.
Alcohol.
Bad relationship.
Pickup trucks.
Tommy.
Mules.
Dead mules.
Alcohol.
Are you all so old you don't know about drugs?
What's our drugs that you're referring to? These drugs you mentioned.
Seriously, the forerunners of these writers, years ago, it was practically a locked phrase. It's Harry, Barry, and Larry.
The Holy Trinity of.
The Holy Trinity of Grit-Lit is Harry Cruz, Barry Hanna, and Larry Brown. And there are lots of others as well, and there are a bunch of nonfiction writers, like early Rick Bragg as well. But we know who they are, and we know what they wrote, and it is the rough South. It is blue collar, unemployed, rural, violent.
Yeah.
It's there. More complicated than that, though. First, when Tom Franklin was going around promoting Hell at the Breach, a very, very fine novel, and a true Grit-Lit, along with his poachers, a true Grit-Lit specimen, he would open up his readings with a passage about some boys drowning a bag full of puppies in a creek. This struck his wife, first of all, as unwise. And everyone agreed that was not the way to sell a novel. Now,
People would walk out of readings as I was giving readings. They would get to leave because they love puppies.
now he opens up his readings with a strange tale of dog abuse in some nut's backyard. Still gritty. George's work partakes of the grit, but is really small town, hapless and feckless folk.
You know, I think there's like I mentioned, the word scam. It seemed like I was brought up around knowing about scams, and I think, and if we look at Larry and Barry and Hare, anything about knockout artists, I mean, those are all kinds of scams and stuff. So I think that's kind of my little avenue.
And Michael's last book and earlier work, I think the way to label Michael Knight's work, in large part, is to say that, you know, the lives of upper class and middle upper class Americans have meaning too. You don't have to necessarily be poor, drooling, toothless, and illiterate to be the subject of fiction. And Michael writes beautifully about doctors and lawyers and accountants and financiers and bankers, and it can be done. But let's go back. The earliest story in Eventide. The earliest story is the story of that nice young man who falls in love with Dana Pint. Dana Pint is a character potentially out of Grit-Lit. Those two can't meet, which brings, for the purposes of our immediate discussion, to something about, if this is something about class, that would be a mixed marriage, a relationship can't work?
Yeah, well, I think Southern writers have been writing about class issues for a long time. It's hardly a new thing for me. Not just Southern writers, writers all over the world. And I think, you know, if we're talking about the gritty and the absence of grit in the world that I'm generally writing about, you know, there is, if you grow up, you know, in a world that is pretty and without the dead mules and things, there's an appeal of violence and of the sort of the beauty of the kind of girl that you're not going to meet, at your high school or whatever. And those things have a kind of exoticism and charm and dangerous kind of attraction, which is, I think, part of what this kid feels in
Yeah, although one hates to say it with Tom sitting right here, but it's erotic.
Yeah.
I mean, that young man was...
What are your favorite porn stars too? What just happened?
I'm not sure about that. I told too much. I think I shouldn't have told that.
No.
Is grit lit utterly classist? Is that the classist? Is it about a stratum of society that really is, except for longing, impenetrable, and there shall be no mixed marriages? Anybody? George?
Well, if you go back to Larry, Harry, and Barry, I think that Larry Brown is mostly upper, lower class people, and I think Harry Cruz would be, sharecroppers and just above. But if you look at Barry Hanna, there are a lot of rich people in those novels. Dr. Levester, or whatever his name is, and all that. And as far as class with Michael, I think this is right. I'm pretty sure it's right. I forget the title of the story, but it starts off something like, Bruce Little stood hunched below St. John Divine Church sign at a payphone calling collect to Mississippi. Is that you?
The sentence is much, much better in my book. But
yes. And if you're so poor that you haven't called people collecting Tom Franklin's steak, then that's low class. But I don't know, what the heck?
If prosperity should break out all over the states of the old Confederacy, would it be the end of grit-lit as we have known it?
I guess we've arrived at a definition of grit-lit. I mean, when I was growing up, so, I guess most of you guys grew up in Alabama, most everybody here grew up in Alabama somewhere. So no matter where you grew up in Alabama, you always feel like the rest of the country considers you a redneck. And grit was a sort of term that meant redneck. Someone would call you a grit, and it was an insult. And so I think in some ways, I don't know if this answers your question or not, but in some ways, it's a way to sort of reappropriate a negative stereotype of the South and turn it into something that we can be proud of. Whether we're writing about shiftless, boozy men, dead dogs in their yards, and pickup trucks that won't crank. I mean, I do think there's some of that in there, that we're sort of claiming this thing as a thing that we can be proud of, whether we're doing that or not on the page. What was your question?
Will prosperity kill grit-lit as we know it? Is there going to be any more grit-lit in the suburbs of Atlanta? Is there right this minute anybody who's growing up in Huntsville with his parents and all his parents' acquaintances, engineers, are we headed for the extinction of this subgenre?
I kind of think we might be headed for the extinction of it because partly the MFA programs. One of the things, my favorite writer is William Gay, who died a few years ago. And William had no education. He went to the public school in Hohenwald, Tennessee. When he went to the library for the first time, he couldn't believe it and asked the librarian how much she had to pay to work there because there were all these books. And a teacher, maybe in the 9th grade, gave him Thomas Wolfe, and he picked cotton. He was a carpenter. He painted houses. There was nothing fake about him. The way there's a lot fake about me, in that I'm writing about these people, but I'm not these people. He really lived it in a way I haven't. I call myself a second or third generation grit litter in that way. I learned to write by going to a writing program and with great teachers who saved me a lot of time. For instance, I would write a short story. There would be 9 pages and it would have 11 characters. My teachers just said, hey, let's make it 3 characters. It's a lot easier to keep up and just to focus it. William Gay didn't have that. Now, some of these people like William Gay or Larry Brown, they find it. William Gay found it by writing Cormac McCarthy and calling him on the phone, and they had a 2-year correspondence through the mail where McCarthy actually critiqued William Gay's manuscripts. And here's a great story. These guys know the story, and you probably do too. But William said, I love the word moon. I had it 4 times on one page. And McCarthy underlined the first moon once, the second twice, the third moon 3 times. By the fourth, he wrote, too many goddamn moons. And what William Gay learned was, don't repeat your words. Like George didn't like those 2 ogres as he read. You know, we don't want to repeat words. It's sloppy and lazy. That's where William Gay learned that. He didn't have a teacher except that Cormac McCarthy. Larry Brown, his teacher, he did take a class from Ellen Douglas, Joe Axton, but his other teacher was Richard Howarth at Square Books. Larry was a firefighter in Oxford. He went in, wanted to be a writer, as he called it, a writer, almost like R-I-D-E-R. And Richard gave him the books to read. And I went to Larry's gave a talk in Mobile, and I went to hear it. When I was a young writer dying to do what Larry was doing, I sat in the front row, and I never, ever used to ask questions. But I asked a question of Larry Brown after his talk. It was at a high school, and there was nothing in his canon, in his oeuvre, in all that he had written that he could read to high schoolers. He had to write an essay for the occasion because his grit lit was so gritty, and they couldn't do it at a high school. But I asked Larry his influences. He said, there's 5. Cormac McCarthy, which was the first time I'd heard that name. William Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, Harry Crews, and the surprise, but then really not, Raymond Carver. Because what I learned from Brown, my dog died, those were simple sentences, and you could imitate them. He also was writing about the people that I grew up noticing. You know, I say I'm a 2nd or 3rd generation grit litter, or a fake grit litter. I was watching other people and doing what they were doing in order to fit in. I wasn't the real thing, if that makes sense.
The real thing is, we talked about Larry Brown, who was a fireman, and Harry had originally been a sharecropper's son. I mean, you can't do that on purpose. You can't go back and grow up as a sharecropper's son just because you want to write.
That's right.
Rough South literature. Michael.
I was just going to ask Tom, what you're saying is much more interesting than what I'm about to say, just to warn you. But so you said you thought grit lit was dying out because of MFA programs. Is that because people teaching MFA programs are teaching the grit out of the students who arrive? Or
I do think so. I think that we are in a much needed time of diversity, and grit lit is the least diverse kind of lit there is. I think our anthology has maybe 1 or 2 women in it. I don't think there are any African Americans in it. And this is not, this is the time for us to, obviously broaden what we read. And so, I'm teaching far fewer white males in my classes. I want to teach, other people and learn from other people. 10 years ago, I taught almost exclusively white males, and now, it's way less than half. So I just think that these MFA programs are purging something. They're never going to purge the freak. And I say that word with all due love. That was William Gay. He was a kind of freak. He dripped language. He was born that way. Larry Brown was not born that way. Larry Brown taught himself to write. He did not have William Gay's cadences, but he did have that hard scrabble upbringing. He knew what he was writing about, and in a way that I get it second or third hand. I mean, I have uncles who tell me these stories. I write about telephoning catfish, where you put electricity into the water, and the catfish with their whiskers float to the top stun, and you get them. Touch them with your hand, they come too. Now, I never did that, but my uncles did. So I think your real first generation grit litters, your true guys, would have been there grabbing the fish or throwing the explosives or whatever.
George, is this your experience with teaching?
I teach out of that book, out of that grit lit anthology, to freshmen, 2nd semester freshmen. Most of my students come from these kind of areas of South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, a bunch of kids from like Birmingham, Montgomery area. A lot of them say, these are my uncles. It's funny, almost all of them say, this is my grandpa, this is my grandma, this is my uncle and aunt. None of them say, these are my parents, or this is my life. So that could be I haven't thought about it, but when we're talking about diversity and stuff, which I think is way important, but it could kind of knock out the writing of it. I'm not sure knock out the reading. I think over the years, people, 100 years, that anthology may be rediscovered. Oh, look how quaint these people are or something. It's odd to put Barry Hannah in this group of three. I never thought about this because when we know that William worked at a boat war factory and did sheetrock and did all this stuff, we know Larry worked in a meatpacking plant or something.
In a store, yeah.
And as a fireman. I don't know that Mr. Hannah really had any kind of, I don't know, but maybe he did, but he had more upper middle class.
Yeah, Mr. Clinton, I think he grew up fairly well off. But,
somewhere he had the gift of language, though. I mean, his language. I mean, I read this Barry Hannah guy. Y'all need to go read like Geronimo Rex or Airships or High Lonesome or You Understand Your Orphan. These are great. I just taught one of these called Ride, Fly, Penetrate, Loiter. My students read it and went, what the hell is going on? I have no clue. And I went, yeah, you don't need to. You just love it for the language. There's no plot whatsoever. It's kind of like listening to a band speak before y'all's time, like REM. I don't know what the heck the lyrics are to these songs, but they sound real good to me. And with Barry's stories, I'm really not sure what's going on here, but boy, it sure does sound.
Well, Barry said, Sal mentioned plot earlier. Barry said, he said, for me, plot, here's plot. The creature slithering through his day is plot enough for Hannah.
Yeah.
And in some of those stories, nothing happens. Or a lot happens, but nothing plot-wise happens.
Yeah.
Larry had a lot more. Larry went way more in the plot direction, especially with books like Father and Son. I mean, that's even out of Art of Crime novel.
Yeah.
Is Gritlit no longer Gritlit if it's not whiteness isn't one of its characteristics? I mean, I was thinking of like Justin Ward. I think we could put Salvage Bones in that category. And I'm ashamed to say I can't think of any names, and maybe they don't exist. But if I'm just looking at the way people are living their lives around in the rural county around Knoxville, Tennessee, there are Latino communities out there, and I wonder if maybe writers will come out of those communities, and we can have a more diverse conversation and curriculum, but also not do away with this great writing about the rural South.
Well, life in Sing, Unburied, Sing.
That's great.
Couldn't be harder.
No,
it is right. It is the roughest South.
The chicken is the grandfather's cut the chicken's house.
Oh yeah, they're chickens, but there's also the cars that don't work very well, and a lot of drugs and parchment prison and beatings and neglect. All of the stuff that we associate with cruises, a childhood, or Big Bad Love, or airships.
I think Barry Hannah, unlike Larry or Harry, I think Barry Hannah kind of invented himself as a gridlitter by drinking and drugs and just crazy living. I mean, there are stories of him standing on balconies in a French Quarter with a Lucky 13 fishing lure, that has 3 treble hooks, casting into the French Quarter crowd and reeling people in. There are lots of stories like that about him. Don knows a few, probably a lot more than I do, but I think there was a kind of desperation there, and I know that desperation is probably the first thing we should have named in the gridlit list we did earlier. But I think there was a kind of desperation that his characters had.
That's what Mark Powell was talking about this morning too, when he was saying, like, here my novels are all about being there and wanting to be here, or being here and wanting to be there. It's like country music, the tropes of country music. I got a job, I hate it and I don't want it, or I don't have a job and boy, I sure would like one, or I got a wife that's treating me bad, or boy, I'm lonely, I want a wife. I mean, it just kind of goes on and on. With Barry, I think it's stranger in a strange land. Just somebody else, this one was talking about being on the fringe. I guess it's more being on the fringes. I think that a bunch of what we do is people kind of looking in on the
What about the regionalism of the thing? I had a conversation with Harry Reeves a number of years ago, and we were talking about how his books were selling or not selling, and I said, writing about freaks all the time, that may not be the way to a bestseller. He said, you tell me. He said, write a novel in which the protagonist is a legless, deaf mute. And you imagine that the housewives of Connecticut are going to buy that book?
But the problem, you know,
do your books, you three, and Barry and the others, do your books find their audience in Connecticut and Massachusetts and Minnesota? Or do you think that your books are mainly reviewed and talked about and bought in the South? Michael, you?
Some, yeah. I mean, I think Tom's your big bestseller up here. You should ask him. But I think the audience for my books tends to be graduate students, students who are interested in learning about writing short stories, and white women over 65. For real. And I don't think Harry was talking about trying to write. I don't think anything good ever in any genre gets written because you're trying to find a market. You write what you can write, you do it as well as you can, and you hope that it lands in a market somewhere. And I think, in fact, you were talking about Southernness. I think Southernness has helped make my books seem a little more exotic than maybe they actually are for people outside the South. So I think it's helped me somewhat in that way.
I would say this. I would say that my first three books, Poachers, is filled with deplorable characters, horrible people you would not want to hang out with. Some of them I know, a lot of them are dead. And then Hell of the Breach starts off with this kid drowning 6 puppies, and people are shot and stabbed, and one guy's shot in the eye, shot in the spine, and he's lying there looking, and all he is an eye, and 3 little boys appear and begin to torture him. Really terrible, neat stuff. And then those books are tame compared to a book I wrote called Smunk, which is my favorite book I've ever written, and it's a book that my mother cried for 3 days after it came out. My mother-in-law called Smut. It's really very, very, very dirty and very violent. It's all my worst tendencies. There must be 500 fart jokes in there. And nobody bought it. And nobody even bought the first 2 either. Then I did this one called Crooked Letter, and it had 2 characters that people could identify with. And suddenly it did sell. I mean, it was like, when you say bestseller, you have to put it in bigger quotes. It wasn't really a bestseller, but it did sell. And I always start every creative writing class with Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s 8 Rules of Creative Writing. I hope you all know these. You can find them on your phones, not right now, because they'll see you up there. But number 4 is give your readers at least one character he or she can root for. And I have not done that. It took me 4 books to figure that out. And once that happened, people bought it.
George, do you write characters that people can care about?
I would hope, but I doubt they do. I would hope that my characters, even though they're all set in the South, every one of them. I started off by writing, my first big chunk of novel when I was about y'all's age, 20 or so, was set in East France, because I'd been to East France for 10 days. The second in Washington, D.C., because I spent 9 months there. The third in Memphis. I'd never even been to Memphis, but I had half the place. And then I started reading Flannery O'Connor and went, oh, this is how to do small southern towns with interesting characters. And I got some kind of freaky characters, usually. Not freaky smart, but freaky. I think if you pull it off, I think if you say, oh, here's a kid who's embarrassed by his father's actions, that should resonate in Seattle and Boston and all that. Yeah. I've never come close to it. I don't even know if I sold 10 books in my life. But I think they do better. They do worse in the worst state of South Carolina. The South Carolinians, evidently where I'm from, don't understand satire or sarcasm. I'm with you. I make fun of myself. Well, they seem to do better in Seattle, Portland, Boston, New York, and Minneapolis for some reason, and somewhere in Florida.
Well, the people in your books are South Carolinians, and to some extent, you're making fun of them.
Yeah.
People in Connecticut are going to like that.
Yeah, maybe so.
You're exploiting the South.
Well, to me, it goes back to saying there's nothing funnier than human misery. We read this stuff and go, my life sucks real bad, but it's not as bad as this character's life is. goes back to Aristotle and catharsis and all that crap. You know?
But I think in George's books, like, so I mean, what you're saying about George's books are true, but I also have the sense that you have a deep and abiding affection for the people that you're making fun of, and that comes through too. I mean, otherwise, it would just be silliness. You know what I mean? It would just be people doing crazy stuff. But it's the affection that you have for the characters that I think is why we kind of give a crap about that. Yeah. Why we give a crap about, why we get so invested in those stories.
Now, you know, if you look at Larry Brown's, if you look at the story we were talking about, Samaritan, we were talking about it at lunch, I think. You know, this is kind of a main character is kind of just down on his luck, and then two people kind of show up in his life at a bar who are worse luck than even this guy. We're kind of pulling for him, I think, a bunch in this story. I'm not quite sure we're pulling for the kid and the mother to show up, but yeah, I would hope that's what all of us are doing, and that's what, and then Grit and Nick is always somebody. In Feast of Snakes by Cruz, I'm not sure we're pulling for Joan, whatever his name is. I can't remember his name.
Mackey.
Joan Mackey, I'm not sure who we're pulling for. I'm pulling for the snake, to be quite honest. When he falls, spoiler alert, when he falls in the snake pit at the end, I go snakes. That's maybe just me.
We mentioned some of the same people over, and in an email that I distributed, one of the things that is useful to do sometimes is to give a little shout out to writers, not necessarily that you're reading right this minute, but that we have read and we have admired, and now we just don't hear about them anymore, and they've sort of dropped out of the world. And my candidate for that has been for years Thomas Wolfe. I thought, as a high school student, college student, graduate student, I thought Look Homeward Angel and the other books were brilliant. I loved them. They were very important. Now you can't find Look Homeward Angel taught anywhere in America. It just dropped away. And some of you have similar authors that you know you care about, and you know they're good, and you know that no one's reading them anymore, or at least not the way they should. And George, I know you have a couple.
Yeah, when you wrote that, I had to think for 8 days. One is Charles Portis, and he may be taught, I don't know, and I'm not a true Grit. I think it's a great novel. I just can't believe the voice of that novel. Also, Norwood is just, I've taught Norwood. Students love it. It's Dog of the South is great. Master of Atlantis, I'm not a big fan of, but these are great books. My other one, and I teach this guy every semester. I teach this guy, and it's Lewis North from Itta Bena, Mississippi, who wrote a slew of books. Passed away maybe 6 or 8 years ago. Maybe about 8 years ago.
Real close to the William Gay passed away.
Yeah, Music of the Swamp and Wolf Whistle. Talking about this is the kind of stemmed from the lynching of Emmett Till. I mean, this is an important novel. It's a great, important novel. But if I could just go around to 100 English professors and say, Lewis Norwood, they don't know who the hell I'm talking about. You know?
I use Music of the Swamp in every fiction book. They always read that.
Norton wanted his memoir to be entitled Don't Weep for Me, Itta Bena. And his New York editor didn't have any idea what he was talking about, and was sure no one would get it, and it's not named that.
Is this Boy with Loaded Gun?
Yeah, Boy with Loaded Gun was supposed to be Don't Weep for Me, or Don't Cry for Me, Itta Bena.
Oh, that's fine.
Mike, what do you want to suggest that we should be thinking about that we're not?
The writer that came out when you sent the email was George Garrett, who I know you knew.
Yes.
George was a teacher of mine, and I think George could do anything on the page. He wrote great short stories. He could be funny. He could be dramatic. And I think George's versatility was kind of a curse for him. You know, I mean, he has this brilliant trilogy of Elizabethan novels that seem like they were written by one writer. And he has this more recent novel called The King of Babylon, Shall Not Come Against You, which is couldn't be any more Southern. And I think people forget that George is from the South, because he could do so many different things, and his writing was all over the world. But yeah, George Garrett, who's really just a cracker from North Florida. And I don't think his books are probably out of print.
I think the evening performance might still, this.
Yeah,
that's a great book. Yeah.
George Garrett, absolutely.
The most versatile writer of all time.
And one of the most generous people any of us had ever known, with his time and his energy. What do you think?
Well, yeah, certainly Lewis, Buddy Norton is incredible. incredible. I think he should be sitting at the right hand of God. I think he's truly amazing. Some of his sentences are just so beautiful, and he can be funny and sad at the same time. And my favorite emotion is that when you're somewhere between laughing and crying. I got a story that or not tell, but I'm going to tell it anyway. We had a hard birth for our second son, a home birth that wound up, not working. Me dragging my wife as her face contorted and turned brown down the hall, but with a plastic with her in case this happened. Sitting in an ambulance holding a bloody baby. It's just, it's such horrible stress because of the idiotic state of Mississippi would not let a midwife administer Pitocin so that the bleeding would stop. But no, we got it, great, but it's fine. It's a happy ending. Except that, I forgot what I was going to say. I did this all.
It started with Little Story.
You read a Buddy Morgan story.
Buddy was that Buddy going to your baby.
Buddy Morgan delivered my baby. He'll come back. I do this all the time. Say again? Thank you, that's it. So, after we'd been home a couple of weeks, and then was out somewhere, and I was holding a little, no, this is Thomas, so it wasn't Thomas. I was holding a little Thomas, and I was rocking it, and I found a movie on TV, and it's called In America. You see that this family comes from Ireland, and they're broke, and their little girls wear like homemade Halloween costumes to school. It's a gorgeous movie, and it's so sad. I'm chill thinking about it. It's so sad at the end, and so I realized I was just for crying. I don't vomit, and I didn't cry, but I was getting close to crying, so I jerked page down quickly, and there was the Bad News Bears, and Timmy Lucas in right field caught the ball and ran back in, and then he started to cry. I was never in my life wept. But then walked in. What's wrong? And I said, all the Bears had their day. Lucas caught the ball. And he started to cry. And the two of us cried together in these, and we were laughing together, and I never felt more alive and better. And that's what Buddy Morgan does to you. He puts you on that line, and you just on both sides. And back what we're naming, Thomas Berger, who nobody reads anymore.
Neighbors.
Thomas
Berger.
Elizabeth Spencer. She's still around, right? I'd like to put Elizabeth Spencer on that.
I think so.
There's also that
Great short story writer.
I had this professor named Fred Chappell, and he has this tetralogy, something I've wanted you forever, right in the corner where you are, 2 or 3 more, I can't remember. And he's kind of like Garrett. He was friends with George Garrett. And also, kind of he did a lot of poetry, he did a lot of novels, he did short stories. He's a great critic. He would come into class every day and kind of stare at the board and then just start writing quotes, sometimes in French, sometimes in Latin. Couldn't pronounce it very well, but he was really...
And all this was at Greensboro.
This is at Greensboro.
Yeah.
He's kind of a genius. I mean, he's a genius. Now, I'm not sure anybody's reading Fred anymore.
And the lesson from all this is that if you write a bunch of novels and you think that you have become immortal and that people will be talking about you for 100 years, even Thomas Wolfe, wherever he is disappointed. So get right in there and do the best you can right now.
He'll come back. We'll come back. We'll come back.
There's like a great joy of thinking about, you're long dead and rotting in your grave, and somewhere in the back of some library somewhere, like someone forgot to throw your book away. They forgot to sell it at the book sale, and somebody comes across it and finds it, and then, gives it to somebody else. Like I still think that actually, maybe the internet has killed that possibility, but I still think that's a thing that people do. I see people at my library. That's as almost as great a pleasure as the thought of being super fancy and immortal. And just the thought that some stranger who has no idea what they're going to get sees this book, sees the spell, like, let me take that's got the shape of Alabama on it. Let me pull that down and see what it's all about. And then all of a sudden, they rediscovered your work.
That is lovely.
And also naive and silly.
Optimistic. That's
I
good.
would never say such a thing. There are questions in the audience, and I've been instructed to allow the microphone to come to you. And here's the microphone. What are the questions?
All right, I have a question for Michael Knight. Football seems to play an important role in one of your stories, The Typhus.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. And I was just curious, like, how do you perceive American football, or football in American culture in general?
Well, I mean, it's way too important, way more important than it should be. I say that as someone who has Nick Saban as my screensaver on my cell phone. You know, I don't know what its cultural relevance is. I don't understand why all writers, though, aren't huge football fans, because it's incredibly complicated, and it's this very tight, totally unscripted, perfect little drama played out on Saturday afternoons. Like, the weather's often nice, you know, like it's colorful, it's beautiful to look at, all these incredibly skilled humans. I mean, that's to me the appeal of it. I think it's, I mean, certainly like way too much money is spent on it. That's, you know, we shouldn't, but I'm guilty of spending some, you know, a significant chunk of that money. Yeah, I mean, I'm a slave. Plus, you know, the young kid from Alabama, I mean, we're brainwashed young. It becomes a part of, like, my identity as someone from Alabama is partly defined by my fanship of Alabama football. You know, and I was a fan when when I was in college. Alabama was okay when I was in college, but you know, everybody who I knew growing up was either a huge Alabama fan or a huge Auburn fan. So being a big Alabama fan was not that big a deal until I went to school in Virginia, where you heard people talking about, oh, Clemson plays a little football, and oh, Virginia has a. Like, you gotta be kidding me. And so then, like, suddenly you're representing your state in some fashion, you know, by your fanship of Alabama football. It becomes like part of the way you think of yourself. You know, that's, you know, it's silly and it's over the top, but it's meaningful in this way. I mean, Alabama football turns up a lot in my picture.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You care about what the other two think about football? I do. I'm curious. What do you two guys think about football?
As long as football is not a synonym for soccer, I'm with football. You know, it's kind of interesting about football now. You know, there's this guy named Steve Allman, we all probably know Steve. He wrote a book called Against Football, and a lot of it has to do with this head injury stuff that's going on the last few years. I mean, it's really coming up, and I kind of feel guilty watching football, because I kind of want to see. I feel guilty because I love football, and I know there's some new rules in place that are smart and wise, but I kind of want to see a guy getting cracked in the head. And I don't want to see the quarterback protected so much, like in the old days.
Anything could happen. That's part of the appeal.
Yeah, that's totally. It's like a NASCAR race. I lived in Darlington for a while. Too tough to tame. That's fun watching stock car racer for me. It's not watching them go in a circle. It's when somebody get a wreck, when somebody get a wreck. Because there's nothing funnier than human misery. I've wrecked a car, but it ain't as bad as that car's wreck.
You're an Ole Miss.
I'm there. I'm conflicted with the SEC. Like Michael, I grew up there. It was either Alabama or Auburn. You were Baptist or Methodist. You were a Franklin or a Bradford. You know, it was all like that. Everything was one or another. And then, but also, I grew up in a family that hunted. I didn't really like to hunt. It wasn't that I'm against it. I love to eat the meat. I didn't like to get up early in the morning and sit in the cold. And you weren't supposed to take a book. I didn't know you could take a book with you and surreptitiously read. So I wasn't a hunter, but I faked it. I killed deer bigger than any member of my family. I killed a deer so big that I could wear the rack like a tutu, which is a funny image, isn't it? But that's a long time ago. But then,
did you do this often with this rack? Did you just put it on and walk around, prance around the room a little bit?
It feels really good. It's just the way the horns are. The horns are exactly in the right angles and place. It just fits so well. But that's football. My family, I've been rabid Alabama fans. Rabid Alabama fans. And I'm such a contrarian that I kind of don't like Alabama anymore because they're so obnoxious about it. And I went to school at the University of Arkansas, and I teach at Ole Miss. You see how screwed up I am? But I've got to say, I never really watched it, but now I watch Ole Miss religiously, and I love them. And I do feel guilt for watching them and loving it, but I feel guilt for most everything else too, so that's just what it is.
Other questions?
I took Miss Reeves Southern Lit last semester, and one thing I noticed was in short stories are considered grit lit was right in the middle of like the really gritty kind of horrific things, there was humor. Do y'all put a lot of humor in your stories because of that? Like to release the tension, or does it just kind of come up?
Yes. No, the truth is that humor relieves tension, right? And no matter how serious it is, where you laugh the most often at a wake. How serious is it? You need the funny in there. You need that funny. You've got to be part of it.
That defense mechanism where people laugh when something really tragic happens. You see someone slip on ice and fall down, and you might turn your head a little bit, but you're going to laugh. I swear you're going to laugh. Maybe that's part of it. One thing that when Tom Franklin wrote this novel called Smunk he was talking about, I need to tell you this story. He wrote Hell at the Bridge. I may be wrong on some of this, but I don't care because this is my story. He wrote Hell at the Bridge. Clint Eastwood read it. Was going to option it. He's like thinking about optioning it for movies. And Clint Eastwood, you know who Clint Eastwood is, the kind of movies that guy makes. He said, this is a little bit too violent for me. Tom Franklin went, oh, you think that's violent? And then he wrote Smunk out of pure team meanness, I think. But it's a satire. It's funny. It's maybe the funniest novel I've read. People are panicking. He's getting like death threats from people, I think.
People hated it.
People get mad.
Yeah.
I wrote him and said, this is really great work. It's funny. It's really, we don't have anything. We're kind of honest with each other. I thought it was really funny, but I'm not sure that everybody else saw that.
Well, once Crocodile came out, every bookstore I went in, they said, thank you for not writing another Smunk. Because I couldn't say, you have to read this. Smunk, they wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
And they would say that about Crocodile.
It's my wife's favorite of your books. And I can remember one time she said to you, Tom, that looks so beautiful. And you looked at her like, what are you talking about? That's not beautiful at all. But she likes it because it's funny. I think one thing that you're a writer. So I think one thing, you want to write a scene that has it's not just one emotional note, like it has complex emotional notes, and so if you're writing a funeral scene and it's nothing but people in black crying and it's raining and it's all the things that we expect, and it's all the sort of cues to generate the emotion that we expect. It's not only is it's probably not going to make you sad either, because it's sort of obvious and it's only going after one emotional note. So it's part of it's not just like to relieve the tension, though that's certainly true, but it's to sort of hit the most complex, most human emotional response to whatever the thing the writer is writing about that particular comment in the story.
That's a perfect sentence. It's written by a friend of all ours, Jack Pendarvis. If y'all don't know Jack Pendarvis, you need to write down Jack Pendarvis. Jack is spelled the normal way. Pendarvis is Pendarvis. He and I used to meet in Ruby Tuesdays in the Bel Air Mall in Mobile and read each other's stories. I'd write one and he would read it out loud to me, and I would read his to him. And if he would, whatever he read, if he couldn't make it sound stupid, it was good. But he once brought in our first line of a story, and the first line was this: one of my grandmothers is dying of cancer, and the other is jealous. That's it right there. He never finished the story. But it's got the tragedy and also how the tragedy is turned into comedy in there, right there. That's what Gordon does.
Jack Pendarvis is one of the funniest writers of all time.
Yeah, he is.
Is there another one here?
This is directed for all three of you. When you write, do you tend to write more for yourself? Towards the story, the idea that you're writing, for the reader, or a mixture of both?
I'll start on that real quick because I want to go back to what Mike was talking about. If you're trying to write something in hopes of, I got to write this so it'll be a bestseller, that kind of thing, or we're talking about the death of you legless person and Harry Crews or whatever. When I'm writing my stories, I'm hopeful that someone else out there is going to want to read it. But to be honest, I'm just having a good old time and just trying to write a good story. Randall Jarrell is a poet and a great critic from a long time ago. Said the chances of writing a great poem are the same as sitting in a lounge chair in your front yard and having a meteor land in your lap. It's difficult to write a perfect poem, and it's difficult for no one to write a perfect short story. But there's always that to look forward to. So for me, every time I set out, I'm thinking, maybe this will be the one. Maybe this will try and make it better. With me, halfway through, I know it's not, but I'm still from South Carolina. I'll just climb on through. But mostly for me, I think, for writing.
For me, this is going to sound like a lie, and it's not. My wife, Beth Ann Fennelly, is the best editor I've ever worked with, and I've worked with good editors in my life. We're the best, too. But she is an amazing editor. and she won't let me get away with anything. There are 2 lines in what I read today that she hates, and I'm going to have to take them out. Well, the whole thing's coming out of this, I suppose. She is so hard on when I write because she wants it to be as good as it can be. So I always have her in my head when I'm writing one. Will this pass the BA test? Will it pass the BA test? So she and I wrote a novel together, and that was an interesting, terrifying experience because we're such different people, she and I. We took a class in grad school, like how to teach, you know. It was a dumb class. But we made a bunch of theory. You don't need theory, you need practical stuff, excuse me. And she got the highest grade in the class. I got the lowest grade in the class. That's who we are. She writes every morning for 2 hours, very meticulous, very methodical. I might go a year without writing a word, and then I'll write 200 pages in 10 days. So we're such different people. Here we are writing a novel together. We got into each other's heads in serious ways, even though we've been married, you know, for 15 years. But here we were working together in a whole other kind of intimacy. And I couldn't have done that with anybody else, that, you know, that level of intimacy, except with my wife. And I'm talking about, of course, writing here, because I couldn't, because we would sit down and write lines together. Like, how about this line? And typically my first drafts are terrible, really bad. I have to work on them again and again and again. I go over something hundreds of times. I know y'all do too. Over and over again to take out every repeated word. You know, too many goddamn moons. Take out that extra moon. Make it, you know, make it as tight as possible. I remember I had an epiphany. In my first published story, Mobile Bay Monthly, it was called Red Christmas. I made $100 for it. I had a guy going to murder Santa Claus. And the editor said, no, my audience is rich white ladies. Let's let him kidnap Santa Claus. I said, great. And the poor that I am, I changed it, got $100. But one of the sentences was, he lowered himself down into the pit. And it occurred to me, you can't lower yourself up. I took out down, and the sentence became better.
Who do you write for, Michael? You have an imaginary reader?
That was such the down. I would have left it in. I'm such a lazy. No, I write like everybody. I mean, I write about things that are interesting to me and moving to me. And at a certain point, you know, so you're an English major, right? So you love to read books, and you know, you're right about like it's impossible to make a perfect story or a perfect novel, but you can still aspire to those things. And at a certain point, I think you've read enough books and enough stories and sort of internalized enough about the way narrative works that you're also writing to make a good story. You're talking about your wife as your first reader. So I read a little bit from that story, King of Jonathon, earlier. My wife is always my first reader, and she's not a writer, but she'll just come and say, okay, I was bored by this. You know, and that's a good note, you know. And so she came in, I could sort of see her in the other room when I was peeking around the door. She came in with the story, and she was crying, she was bawling. So I thought, okay, good. So the story, it moved me, and so it moved another reader. And she threw it on the table and said, God, darn, this is why you're not famous. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, I love that character so much. Why couldn't you give him a happy ending? And I said, because it would have been a good story. You know, like the story demanded a tragedy in that case. You know? And so I think at some point, like you're after making a fine story, like making a story that you can be proud of, beyond just whether you're interested in it or emotionally. I think that's the thing.
I kind of want to amend my answer because actually I write for Beth Ann too. She's my first reader. A lot of times we work out first lines together. Tommy doesn't. Oh, never mind.
No, actually I'm outside watching through the window. The story gets creepier and creepier.
We know about your affliction.
You're not taking it really, are you? You are. Oh, jeez.
If there are no more questions, let us thank these gentlemen for their candor and their wit. Thank you.
And thank Don, too. That's terrific. Thank you, Don.
Yeah. Thank you, Don. Yeah.